Delusional idiot, really. The words sliced through the air like a blade, dripping with mockery from Donald Trump himself. It's the kind of insult meant to humiliate, to crush, but instead it sparks something dangerous. Because Jasmine Crockett isn't here for a polite debate. She's standing in front of 40 million Americans, and she's holding evidence that could rip open a scandal big enough to haunt a former president for decades. A single photograph, one handshake, and a guest list tied to an FBI investigation that's already put 3 men behind bars and left millions of dollars unaccounted for. In the next few minutes, America will see what happens when the most powerful man in the room is forced to face a truth he's spent years trying to bury. And it all started with one insult he should never have spoken. The words were still hanging in the air, raw and acidic, when the lights shifted. A sudden white-hot beam snapping across the stage like a lightning strike. The audience flinched at the brightness. Some squinted, some leaned forward, and that's when the camera moved. A slow, deliberate zoom that tunneled straight toward Jasmine Crockett's hand. Her fingers were curled around the edge of a leather folio, knuckles tight, veins rising against her skin. Every movement felt like it had been rehearsed 1,000 times, yet pulsed with the kind of heat that only comes when the stakes are too high to fake. The folio opened. No flourish, no hesitation, just the clean, surgical motion of a woman about to make her move. And then, the sound. Not a shout, not a gasp. It was the sharp, echoing thud of thick photo paper slamming against polished wood. A sound that could travel across a room, through the cameras, straight into living rooms across America. The image slid forward, half-shadowed under the stage lights. At first, just a wash of white fabric, champagne shimmer, then clarity. Donald Trump, in a blinding white suit, grinning, his hand locked in a confident shake with a man whose mugshot had headlined every network in the country just months ago. The same man now serving a federal sentence for money laundering. The room changed instantly. You could hear it, the simultaneous, involuntary intake of breath from hundreds of people. A deep, low hiss of shock. One man in the front row stood up without thinking, his chair scraping the floor, before gravity and disbelief forced him back down. Somewhere in the balcony, a woman's hand flew to her mouth. A reporter's pen froze mid-sentence. The air thickened, hot and unmoving, like a sealed vault holding too many secrets. For a heartbeat, nobody spoke. Not Trump, not Jasmine, not even George Stephanopoulos. The cameras caught it all. The stillness, the tension, the way the photo on the desk seemed to hum with unspoken history. It wasn't just a picture. It was a piece of a night the most powerful man on that stage had hoped the world would forget. Jasmine didn't move her eyes from Trump's face. Not for a second. Her jaw was set, her gaze steady. It wasn't anger. Anger burns too fast. This was something colder, heavier. The look of someone who knows they've just drawn blood in a fight where every cut matters. Trump's smile faltered. Not much. Just enough for the camera to catch the twitch at the corner of his mouth. Just enough for millions watching at home to see that the insult he'd thrown minutes ago had already started to boomerang back at him. And the photo. Oh, the photo was merciless. The grain of the image only made it more real, more dangerous. The lighting matched archive shots from that infamous white party in the Hamptons. Even the reflection in the champagne glasses hinted at more faces. Blurred but not beyond recognition to those who'd been there. Jasmine's hand stayed on the corner of the print, like she was pinning it to the stage, refusing to let it be brushed aside. A whisper rolled through the crowd, small at first, then swelling. It wasn't just the murmuring of curiosity. It was the sound of people calculating. Who else was there? What else happened that night? Trump shifted behind his podium, one hand gripping the edge so tightly the skin went pale. His other hand adjusted his tie, a motion so practiced it almost passed as casual, except for the way his eyes kept flicking to the image like it might leap up and accuse him on its own. In the control room, a producer mouthed to the camera crew, "Stay tight on her. Don't cut away." The lens zoomed closer to Jasmine's face. Her breathing was slow, deliberate, each inhale and exhale a silent countdown. The crowd's focus narrowed with the shot. It was no longer just a debate, it was a standoff. On one side, Juan, a former president whose voice had always been his weapon. On the other, a congresswoman who'd just chosen a different kind of ammunition. And for the first time all night, his weapon wasn't working. You could see it in the smallest details. The way he blinked one beat too long, the subtle clench of his jaw before forcing it to relax, the restless shifting of his stance, like the floor itself had grown unsteady beneath him. In the third row, a retired Marine leaned forward so far his medals caught the light. Beside him, a woman in a Navy church hat murmured under her breath, "Lord, here it comes." The heat from the stage lights seemed to press harder on everyone in the room. And in that pressurized silence, the insult from moments earlier, delusional idiot really, echoed like a warning he'd failed to heed. Because in those 19 seconds, everything shifted. The balance of the night tilted. The audience wasn't just watching anymore. They were witnessing. Every breath, every blink, every flicker of expression was being recorded, replayed in real time on 100 feeds across the internet. And the longer the silence stretched, the heavier it became. Like the pause before thunder cracks. Jasmine finally spoke. Not loud, not rushed, just enough to carry. "Sometimes," she said, eyes locked on him, "the truth doesn't need an introduction. It just needs a moment." The words settled into the room like dust after an explosion. Trump opened his mouth to speak, but in that instant, the photo between them became more than paper. It became a live fuse. And everyone, on stage, in the audience, in living rooms across the country, knew it was only a matter of time before it blew. And everyone, on stage, in the audience, in living rooms across the country, knew it was only a matter of time before it blew. But out of sight, just a few steps beyond the bright, white heat of the stage, another world was moving. Behind the black velvet curtain, the air was different. Thicker, warmer, and buzzing with the kind of energy that can't be rehearsed. Assistants darted between cables and light stands, their whispers sharp and urgent. One leaned in close to another, the green glow of a phone screen lighting their faces as they shared something that made both eyebrows shoot up. A breaking update, a name, a time. It was the kind of fragment that could topple the careful balance of the night. In the shadows, a young tech operator crouched beside a stack of equipment. His job was to monitor sound levels. But his phone was angled just so, capturing a sliver of the action in a vertical frame. The red recording dot blinked quietly, feeding a private TikTok account that would soon find its way into the veins of the internet. The smell backstage was a mix of fresh paint, hot electrical wiring, and perfume. The strange, intoxicating cocktail of television politics. Every few seconds, a muffled burst of applause or laughter bled through the curtain, quickly swallowed by the heavy fabric. Jasmine Crockett stood alone near a lighted mirror. The bulbs cast a warm halo around her, but her reflection was carved in shadow and focus. Her hands moved slowly, adjusting the lapels of her jacket, pressing them flat as if sealing something into place. Her eyes never left the glass. And in a voice just above a whisper, she told herself, "Tonight is not just politics. This is truth." The words didn't tremble. They landed solid, each syllable a quiet act of defiance against the chaos swirling only feet away. One of her aides appeared at her side, eyes bright with a mix of adrenaline and fear. A single line was passed to her in hushed tones, so soft that the hum of the stage equipment nearly drowned it out. But the effect was immediate. Her shoulders squared, her breathing slowed. Somewhere above them, a lighting rig groaned as it shifted position. The metallic creak bled into the heavy bass line of the house theme music, muffled but insistent. It was the sound of the outside world closing in. On the other side of the curtain, Trump was still in his element. He leaned one elbow on his podium, the smirk firmly replastered across his face. A quick scan of the audience found his people. Familiar faces in the VIP section. He caught one man's eye, gave a slow, deliberate wink. It was the wink of a man convinced he still owned the room, the kind of silent message that says, "Don't worry, I've got this." Backstage, Jasmine didn't see it, but she didn't need to. She'd seen that brand of confidence before. It always burned brightest right before it cracked. One of the stagehands passed by, earpiece crackling, murmuring cues into a handheld mic. The countdown clock was visible now from her position. 2:13 until the next segment. Time was both crawling and sprinting. A makeup artist appeared, blotting her forehead with a tissue she didn't really need. It was just muscle memory, the ritual of television. But Jasmine barely noticed. Her mind was already back in the heat of the lights, the cold weight of the photo in her hand. The tech operator's phone camera panned across the wings for just a moment, catching her in frame. The poised stillness of a woman waiting for the right moment to step into the center of the storm. Another aide slid by, their whisper barely audible. "Segment 2 is locked, green across the board." Jasmine replied without turning her head, a single word that was almost a breath. "Good." Beyond the curtain, Trump chuckled at something only he found amusing. The low rumble of his voice carried just enough for her to hear the cadence. The practiced rhythm of a man used to controlling the tempo of every room. The irony wasn't lost on her. The man who thought he could control the air was about to learn what it felt like when someone else owned the silence. Somewhere off to the left, a producer's voice rose above the backstage murmur. 30 seconds. The stage hands snapped into final positions. Camera cranes tilted, red tally lights flickering to life. The LED wall at the back of the stage shifted to a countdown animation, numbers flashing like the last beats before detonation. In the control room, directors traded clipped phrases over headsets. One of them pointed at a monitor showing Jasmine's still figure in the shadows. "She's coiled. She's ready. Don't miss this." The edge of the curtain was only a few steps away now. Jasmine flexed her fingers once, twice, letting the tension bleed from them before taking a slow, measured breath. On stage, Trump's smirk lingered, his gaze sweeping lazily across the crowd. For him, it was still a game. For her, it was war. The final cue came, a simple nod from the stage manager. Jasmine stepped forward. The fabric of the curtain brushed her arm, cool against the heat of her skin. The lights on the other side burned brighter than memory, sharper than thought. And as the roar of the crowd swelled again, she crossed the invisible line from shadow into fire. What happened next would make the insult that started it all feel like the smallest spark in a night built entirely on explosions. The first thing Jasmine saw as she stepped into the glare was not Trump's face, but the faces beyond him. A sea of strangers. 100 separate stories folded into a single humming silence. Front row, center, a retired Marine sat so still he could have been carved from stone. His jaw was locked, his hands resting on his knees, until her gaze caught his and she saw it. The slow curl of his fingers into fists, the tendons straining just enough to turn his knuckles white. 2 rows behind him, a college student leaned back in her seat, arms crossed, chin lifted in open defiance. Her hoodie was black, the words "Justice for All" cracked and faded from too many washes, the kind of garment worn to rallies and vigils. She didn't blink when Jasmine passed her eyes over. She wanted to be seen, to be noted as someone who wouldn't clap no matter how loud the room got. But there were others, people who seemed caught in between, the ones who kept their hands folded in their laps, eyes darting between Jasmine and Trump as if they were watching a chess game they couldn't quite predict. To the far right of the audience, a man in a red tie leaned forward, his elbows digging into his thighs, nodding almost imperceptibly whenever Trump shifted his weight to speak. 2 seats away, a woman in a pale blue sweater clasped her hands so tightly her knuckles looked like porcelain, lips pressed into a single unbroken line. It wasn't just a crowd. It was 2 nations sharing one room. The division wasn't loud, not yet. It was subtler, more dangerous. A split that could be traced in body language, in the way eyes narrowed or widened, in the heat of breath pushed through clenched teeth. On the press row, the old guard sat, hunched over battered notebooks and thick pens. One man in particular, his hair silver, his trench coat frayed at the cuffs, had set his pen down entirely. Instead of writing, he watched Jasmine with a kind of still, unblinking patience, as though her eyes held the story and not her words. Behind him, a younger reporter typed without pause, the light of his laptop screen painting his face an unnatural blue. Every keystroke was fast, urgent, the sound of someone chasing a headline before it cooled. Jasmine didn't break stride. She let her gaze sweep the room, catching fragments of whispered conversations, A man muttering into his phone, "This is going to blow up." A woman whispering to the person beside her, "She's about to do something." The tension lived in the pauses, in the little moments when no one knew whose voice would fill the air next. On stage, Trump stood in profile to her, scanning the same crowd through a different lens. He wasn't looking for conviction. He was hunting for loyalty. Each nod, each smirk aimed in his direction was a tally mark, a reassurance that his base was still anchored to him. And yet, every time his gaze drifted to the photo on Jasmine's podium, there was the faintest break, a hesitation, a blink just a hair too long. From the back row, a camera lens as long as an arm swung to catch the shot. Jasmine standing tall, Trump's smirk frozen mid-curl, the audience suspended between them. The image would be in a dozen wire services before the hour was out. The lights above were merciless. They caught every beat of sweat, every twitch of a lip. No one could hide here. Not the man in the front row gripping his program like it was a lifeline. Not the woman fanning herself with the edge of a debate flyer. Not even Trump. Somewhere off to the side, a cough cracked the stillness, and every head turned as if grateful for a break in the tension. It didn't last. The silence folded back over them, thicker than before. It was in that silence that Jasmine let her hand brush the edge of the photo again, the faint rasp of paper against wood amplified in the minds of those watching. The Marine's fists tightened further. The student's crossed arms grew stiffer. The old reporter leaned an inch closer, as though proximity could pull the truth out faster. Jasmine's voice hadn't yet returned to the air, but the room was already hers in a way that words alone could never buy. She had their attention, and in politics, that's the currency that counts. Trump shifted his weight, clearing his throat. The sound was small, almost nothing. But in a room like this, small things could be earthquakes. And in that charged, delicate balance, one breath from breaking, the two worlds in the audience held, waiting to see which side of the fault line would move first. Trump moved first. He shifted his stance, rolling one shoulder back like a boxer resetting in the ring. The microphone caught the scrape of his breath before the words came. Smooth at first, then sharpened to a point. "She's soft," he said, his eyes never leaving the crowd. A slight pause, deliberate, before he twisted the knife. "She's weak, and weak people don't protect this country." It wasn't shouted, it didn't need to be. The cadence was practiced, honed from years of rallies and applause breaks. He knew how to pitch an insult so it carried not just to the ears, but deep into the chest of those listening. A low ripple of laughter and muttered approval rolled through one pocket of the audience. Someone clapped, short, sharp, as if signaling agreement. From the VIP section, a man in a red tie nodded, his smile fixed like a campaign poster. The other half of the room stayed still, colder. The college student in the hoodie leaned forward now, eyes narrowing. The retired Marine's jaw flexed but didn't release. On the press row, cameras snapped in a flurry. Ch-ch-ch-ch. Machine gun bursts of shutters as photographers caught the moment mid-insult. Flashes lit the stage in staccato rhythm, freezing Trump's smirk in unforgiving bursts of white. Jasmine didn't move. She let the words hang, the laughter swell, the shutters fire. She let him believe the space between them was his to own. Her hands stayed loose at her sides, but her eyes stayed locked on him. Not blinking, not flinching, just watching, the way a chess player studies the piece she knows she will take. And when the sound began to ebb, she moved. Not a step, not even a lean, just enough to bring her voice to the mic. Her tone was calm, almost conversational, the kind of voice you use when you're not trying to win the room with volume, but with precision. "Facts," she said, "aren't soft." The first words cut through the quiet like the crack of a whip. She didn't rush. "Truth," she went on, "doesn't bend to fit your comfort. And some truths, like the company you've kept at certain parties, don't fade." A soft gasp slid through the front row. The Marine's fingers tightened. Somewhere in the balcony, a voice whispered, "Oh!" just loud enough for a microphone to catch it. Trump's head turned toward her now, the smirk still there but stiffer, as if holding its shape required more muscle than before. The air between them was suddenly alive. That invisible wire pulled taut, humming. And then came the sound. Not applause, not boos. The faint collective inhale of a room realizing they'd been handed something loaded. The cameras caught it all. Jasmine's steady gaze, Trump's slight shift, the press snapping frame after frame. Each ch-ch-ch of the shutters landed like punctuation in a sentence no one could yet finish. For the audience at home, the feed zoomed in, tight on her face, tight on his reaction, tight on the thin sliver of space between them. Jasmine's voice didn't rise, but it carried like it had weight behind it. Her cadence slowed, letting each word fall into place like a brick in a wall she was building in real time. "You can call me soft," she said. "You can call me naive." Another beat. Silence stretched just enough. "But what you can't call me is afraid of the truth." This time there was no laughter. The Marine sat back, arms folded now across his chest. The student's arms stayed crossed, but her chin dipped just slightly, as if granting a quiet nod. In the press row, the silver-haired reporter picked up his pen again. But he didn't write. He tapped it against the page, eyes never leaving Jasmine, as if marking time for what was coming next. Trump's smirk twitched. It was small, almost imperceptible, but the cameras saw it. They always see it. A single flash caught his face just as the corner of his mouth dropped, and that image would be replayed, dissected, and slowed down on news cycles before the night was over. Jasmine didn't break eye contact. Her fingers brushed the edge of the photo on her podium, the gesture so subtle it could have been absent-minded. But the effect was anything but. The audience didn't know what was coming next, but they knew in their bones that something was. Some leaned forward, some leaned back. Phones lifted, ready to record whatever happened in the next breath. Because in that moment, the words had already cut, and the room was waiting to see just how deep the wound would go. Jasmine let the silence breathe, as though she could feel the pulse of the room under her fingertips. Her eyes stayed on Trump's, not blinking, not softening. Then her voice dropped, lower, slower. "You remember the White Party, don't you?" The words landed like a slow, heavy stone hitting deep water. No one spoke, but the reaction was instant. From the second row, a woman's sharp intake of breath sliced through the hush. Somewhere off to the left, a voice muttered, "Oh no." Quiet, but caught by a roaming mic and piped softly through the speakers. Trump didn't move at first. Then almost imperceptibly, his jaw tightened. The audience seemed to lean toward the stage without meaning to. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was anticipation, the kind that prickles the skin before lightning. The cameras knew it too. One lens cut tight on Trump's face. Another drifted lazily over the front section of his supporters. A cluster of familiar red ties and fixed smiles. The camera lingered long enough to catch a man swallow hard, his Adam's apple bobbing like it wanted to escape his throat. Beside him, a woman blinked too fast, eyes darting sideways toward the aisle before she forced them back to the stage. The heat of the stage lights still burned down, but the room itself felt colder, as if some invisible draft had slipped in under the doors. People shifted in their seats, not from discomfort, but from something more primitive, a shared instinct to brace. Trump cleared his throat, aiming for casual, but the sound caught slightly on the way out. "That's cute," he said, forcing a chuckle. "A party. Really?" But the word party hung there like bait that no one wanted to touch. Jasmine tilted her head, the hint of a smile flickering at the corner of her mouth. Not joy, not mockery, but recognition. She knew he'd taken the hook. Her gaze swept the audience now, letting her words move with the slow, deliberate pace of someone guiding them into a story they didn't yet realize was a trap. "Some nights," she said, "fade with time. This one never did." White linen, champagne towers, music spilling over manicured lawns. The guest list so exclusive you could count the names on your fingers and still have one left to point at the truth. A nervous laugh escaped from somewhere in the middle rows. Sharp, short, and immediately swallowed by silence. Trump shifted again, his stance now less a display of ease and more an effort to plant himself in place. He glanced toward the moderator, but George Stephanopoulos didn't bite. The cameras stayed locked on them, the control room feeding a steady split screen. Jasmine unblinking. Trump blinking too often. In the balcony, a young man with a press badge scribbled something so fast his pen tore the paper. Beside him, an older woman in a pearl necklace leaned forward, the pearls pressing into her collarbone, eyes narrowed in something between fascination and fear. Jasmine let her hand drift, almost idly, to the edge of the folder on her podium. Her fingertips tapped once, twice, the rhythm steady, like a countdown only she knew. From the wings, a stagehand froze mid-step, sensing the air shift again. Even the hum of the overhead lights felt louder, more insistent. Some people from that night, Jasmine continued, aren't here to speak for themselves anymore. And some are ready to talk. A murmur rippled through the audience like the first tremor before a quake. The camera swept again over Trump's supporters, catching another man's eyes flick toward the exit before snapping forward. Trump's smirk returned, but it was thinner now, stretched tight over something less certain. "Fake news," he said, louder than before. The phrase cracked in the mic, the pitch climbing higher than his usual delivery. The control room didn't cut away. They caught the twitch of his jaw, the tightening of his grip on the podium, the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Not in rhythm with confidence, but with the restless energy of someone looking for an opening to run. Jasmine didn't give it to him. Instead, she took a step closer to her mic, letting her voice land softer so the audience had to lean in to catch it. "It's funny," she said, "how one night, one photo, can still make the most powerful man in the room flinch." The words didn't echo. They settled, low and heavy, filling every corner. The Marine in the front row nodded once, slow. The college student in the hoodie sat forward, elbows on knees now, locked in. The line between the two halves of the audience had never felt sharper. And somewhere, deep in the bones of the room, the fuse burned shorter. Then miles away from the heat of the stage, a different light flickered. In a dim Brooklyn apartment, the glow from a flat-screen TV washed over a low-leather couch. On the screen, the debate, live and unblinking. In the room, Marcus Shade Johnson. He sat forward, elbows on his knees, his gold chain catching flashes of city light spilling through half-drawn blinds. Outside, sirens wailed faintly, the sound warping as it bounced off brick walls. Inside, the only noise was the low hum of the broadcast and the restless tapping of Marcus's thumb against his phone. His eyes didn't blink. Not when Jasmine Crockett spoke, not when Trump smirked, not when the words "white party" cut through the air like a shard of glass. The camera feed caught Trump's slight flinch. Marcus saw it too, and it wasn't just recognition, it was memory. His hand tightened around the phone, knuckles pale against dark skin. For a moment, the edges of the screen reflected in his eyes, replaying a night he hadn't spoken of in years. Music, champagne, the weight of too many secrets packed into one summer evening in the Hamptons. He exhaled, slow. Then, without hesitation, he unlocked his phone. The screen lit up, bathing his face in cold light. 3 words, simple, direct. "I was there." He hit send. Across the East River, in the controlled chaos of the backstage wing, a notification buzzed on the wrist of Jasmine's aide. The vibration was small, almost lost in the shuffle of headset chatter and stage cues. But when she glanced down and saw the sender's name, her eyes widened, sharp and bright with sudden purpose. Back in Brooklyn, Marcus leaned back, his free hand rubbing over his jaw. He kept watching, but his posture had changed. The weight in his shoulders shifted from passive witness to something else. Something ready. Outside his window, headlights streaked across wet asphalt. The city moved on, oblivious. But Marcus knew the night had just chosen its next player. In the studio, the air still felt electrified. The white party reference lingered like smoke that refused to clear. Jasmine stood at her podium, composed, but the tiniest shift in her stance betrayed that she'd just been handed a card she hadn't expected to play tonight. Her aide cut through the tangle of cables and crew, moving like someone who knew every step had to look casual, even when it wasn't. She waited until the stage lights swung toward the moderator, using the distraction as cover. Leaning in close, her voice barely more than a thread, she spoke into Jasmine's ear. "Marcus Shade says he was there." It landed like a silent detonation. Jasmine didn't move, didn't blink, didn't let the information show on her face. But her grip on the podium eased, not in relief, but in readiness. She had her truth. Now she had a witness. From the audience, no one could see the shift. From the control room, the director caught only the subtlest change. A micro smile, the kind you might mistake for nothing at all if you weren't looking for it. Trump was still talking, leaning into the mic with his usual rhythm, but for the first time since the night began, Jasmine wasn't just reacting to him. She was thinking 2, 3 moves ahead. In the front row, the Marine leaned back, sensing something, but not knowing what. The student in the hoodie tilted her head, catching a flicker of something in Jasmine's eyes she hadn't seen before. The stage lights bore down, relentless, but now the heat wasn't just on Trump. It was in the room, coiling, gathering, preparing to strike from an angle no one had expected. Back in Brooklyn, Marcus rose from the couch. He moved to the window, looking out over the city like he was studying a battlefield. The TV behind him kept playing, the voices from the debate mingling with the sound of traffic far below. His phone buzzed again. A reply. Stand by. Marcus smiled. Not wide, not warm, but with the satisfaction of someone who's been holding on to a piece of the truth for far too long. In the studio, Jasmine glanced down for the briefest second, then back up at Trump. If he noticed, he didn't understand. Not yet. But the fuse, already short, had just been fed more powder. And this time, the blast wouldn't just be heard in the room, it would echo across every street, screen, and headline in America. The moderator's next question never made it to air. Not because it wasn't asked, but because every eye, every camera, every muscle in the room shifted as the side door opened. It wasn't a grand entrance. No swelling music, no dramatic spotlight, just the sound of hinges moving slow against weight. And then the figure in the doorway, Tasha Green. She didn't hurry. Her steps were measured, unbroken, like each one was chosen. The crowd's murmur softened into a low, collective hum as she crossed the threshold and moved toward the stage. In her right hand, dangling just enough for the light to catch it, was a camera. Not a sleek, modern DSLR, but something older, heavier. The metal was worn smooth where years of fingers had gripped it, and along its edges the paint had chipped down to dull silver. As she reached the halfway point to the podiums, the sound came. Clink. It was small, almost delicate, the sound of old metal brushing against itself. But in the silence of the room, it cut through like ice water down the spine. Trump's head turned sharply toward it. The smirk was already forming, that familiar mask of dismissal. But his eyes betrayed him. They locked on the camera and didn't leave. If you were watching from home, you might have thought his focus meant nothing. But in the room where the air was thick and the lights merciless, you could see the difference between looking and staring. This was staring. Tasha stopped just short of the moderator's desk. She didn't look at Trump yet. Her gaze stayed forward, her expression carved into something that wasn't quite neutral. Too sharp at the edges for that. From the control room, a director's voice crackled in someone's earpiece. Zoom on the camera, now. The feed cut to it in high definition. Scratches along the base plate, a dent near the viewfinder, the faint etching of a name that had long since faded under wear. Jasmine's eyes followed it. She knew that kind of camera. The kind you couldn't just delete from. Film. Tangible. Permanent. Trump gave a short, sharp laugh, shaking his head. That looks like it belongs in a pawn shop. What's the point? The words were light, even mocking, but the timbre of his voice wavered for a fraction of a second. A drop so subtle most wouldn't catch it. But the microphones caught everything. Tasha finally looked at him. It wasn't a glare. It wasn't even anger. It was knowing. Like she was looking at someone she'd already outplayed. The audience felt it. Some shifted in their seats. Others leaned forward, drawn into the invisible thread between the two of them. From the front row, the retired Marine's eyes narrowed. The student in the hoodie whispered something to the person beside her, who didn't answer. Too focused on the stage. Tasha stepped up to Jasmine's side. The camera dangled loosely at her hip, the strap worn but intact. She placed her free hand on the podium, fingers spread like she was anchoring herself there. This isn't a prop, she said, her voice calm and steady. This is history. The line hung in the air. Trump exhaled through his nose, the smirk hardening. Yeah, sure, let me guess. You're about to tell us you've got the smoking gun. Tasha tilted her head slightly as though considering whether or not to answer. Then the faintest smile touched her lips. I don't have to tell you, she replied. You already know what's on it. The reaction was immediate, a swell of whispers, the low roll of tension cresting into something heavier. In the control room, someone whispered into their mic. Stay wide, keep both of them in frame. Trump leaned toward his mic, but his eyes kept drifting to the camera. That, more than anything, betrayed the pull it had on him. The old reporter in the press row had stopped writing entirely. His pen rested on the pad, forgotten. He was watching Trump's hands now. The way they gripped the edge of the podium just a little too hard. Jasmine glanced at Tasha, just for a heartbeat, and there was no smile, no nod, just silent agreement. Whatever game they were playing, it had just shifted into a higher gear. Trump tried again, forcing his voice into its usual swagger. I've been in a million photos. That doesn't mean anything. Tasha's reply was soft, but the kind of soft that carried, some photos mean everything. And then she let the camera swing, just slightly, so the strap creaked and the metal edges brushed together again. Clink. The sound went through the room like a chill wind. It was the sound of something real, something that couldn't be spun away with words. And for the first time tonight, it wasn't Jasmine who had Trump's full attention. It was the woman with the old camera and whatever ghost she'd brought with her. Tasha didn't rush. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, as if every second she took was another turn of the screw. She lifted the camera with both hands, her fingers sure despite the age of the machine. Then, without looking away from Trump, she reached into her bag and slid out a single, glossy print encased in a transparent sleeve. The plastic caught the stage lights and flashed once, just enough to make the audience collectively lean forward. She passed the photo to the moderator. George Stephanopoulos didn't speak. He didn't need to. Instead, he gave the briefest nod to a stagehand who whisked it toward the projection booth. On the LED wall behind them, the current debate graphics dissolved into black. A heartbeat later, the photo bloomed across the entire screen. Gasps punched the air out of the room. Donald Trump, in a blinding white suit, standing shoulder to shoulder with a man whose name had dominated front pages during a high-profile federal trial. Their hands were clasped in a firm shake, both smiling for a camera that clearly hadn't been meant for the public. And just over Trump's shoulder, blurred but unmistakable, was Sean Diddy Combs, caught mid-laugh, champagne flute tilted in his hand. The background noise, the quiet hum of stage equipment, the soft rustle of shifting bodies, stopped cold. Then in a move so subtle it almost went unnoticed, the sound engineers cut the ambient audio from the broadcast. The result was electric. The audience could hear each other, the sharp hiss of someone's breath, the low incredulous, no way from the back row, and then, cack, the sharp clatter of a phone hitting the floor. Its owner scrambled to pick it up, but the noise had already rippled through the silence, punctuating the shock like an accidental drumbeat. Cameras in the press row fired in rapid bursts. Flashes popped across the room, each one freezing Trump in a slightly different state of reaction. The squint, the tightened lips, the quick glance to his lawyer in the front row. On stage, Jasmine didn't move. Her gaze stayed locked on him, letting the giant image behind them do all the speaking. Trump forced a laugh, shaking his head as though the photo were some cheap trick. Looks like Photoshop to me, he said into the mic, his tone pitched just a little too high. No one laughed with him. From the corner of the stage, Tasha's eyes never wavered. She knew the weight of what was on that wall. So did Marcus Shade Johnson, watching from his apartment, his jaw set as the image filled his television screen. In the audience, the Marine's hands rested on his knees again, but this time they were open, not clenched, as though bracing for whatever was about to land next. The student in the hoodie muttered something under her breath, her eyes narrowed like she was memorizing every pixel. One man in the VIP section glanced toward the exit, his expression suddenly calculating. A woman beside him crossed her legs the other way, the movement sharp, almost defensive. The control room held the image steady, refusing to cut back to a wide shot. They knew this wasn't a moment to dilute. It was the kind of still that would live on in screenshots, in news cycles, in campaign ads. Trump tried again. Folks, I meet thousands of people every year. Shaking a hand doesn't mean you're best friends. But his voice wasn't carrying the same easy swagger. Each word seemed heavier, more labored, as if they had to be pushed out against a weight pressing in on his chest. Jasmine finally spoke, her tone soft but slicing clean. And how many of those handshakes end with one man in prison, another under federal investigation, and a third pretending the night never happened? A murmur swept the audience. Someone whistled low. The Marine leaned forward again. Trump's eyes flicked, just for a second, to the photo over his shoulder. The camera operators caught it. The producers replayed it on an internal monitor, already marking it for post-broadcast clips. Tasha stepped back, letting the image dominate the stage. The camera in her hand swung slightly, the strap creaking, another faint metallic clink slipping into the hot, tense air. In that moment, the divide in the audience wasn't just visible, it was palpable. One half watched Trump for a defense that wasn't coming. The other half watched Jasmine and Tasha, waiting for the next blow. And in the middle, in that precarious fault line, the truth stood 20 feet high behind them, impossible to edit, impossible to deny. But Jasmine wasn't done. She let the photo hang in the air for a moment longer, letting its weight sink deep into every corner of the room. Then slowly, she slid one hand to the side of her podium and lifted a slim, tan manila folder. No sudden movement, no dramatic flourish, just that quiet, deliberate lift, the way someone places a final card on the table when they know the hand is already won. The cameras tracked her hand as she unclasped the metal tab. A faint click echoed through the stage mics. She drew out a single sheet of paper, the white bright and cold under the stage lights. It caught every reflection. The edges crisp, the text dense, the ink bold. She laid it flat on her podium and angled it toward the overhead camera. The LED wall behind them shifted, the photo dissolved, and then the document filled the screen, magnified to a size where every letter could be read from the back row. At the top, a date, August 14th, 2015, the exact night of the White Party. Murmurs swelled in the crowd, a low rolling noise that sounded almost like the wind changing direction. Jasmine didn't speak yet. She let the audience read the heading for themselves. Service agreement, confidential. Two names printed at the bottom. One of them was the man now in prison. The other, Donald J. Trump. The camera operators knew their job. One lens stayed wide on the LED wall, capturing the sheer scale of the words. Another cut in close, so close the viewers at home could see the grain of the paper. And then came the killer shot, a tight zoom on the signature. It was Trump's, no question, but not the smooth, confident scrawl that adorned his campaign hats and book covers. This one wavered. The pen had pressed harder in some strokes, lighter in others, as if the hand holding it had wanted to be anywhere else but over that line. The ink even bled slightly in one corner, like it had paused too long, the tip trembling before committing. From the front row, the Marine squinted at the big screen. Looks like a man who didn't want to be caught signing that, he muttered to no one in particular. The press row erupted in a quiet storm. Laptops clattered open. Cameras clicked at machine gun speed. One reporter whispered urgently into her phone, "She's got a contract, signed, the same night." Trump broke his silence with a scoff that came out harsher than intended. This is ridiculous. Anyone could fake that. Photoshop, AI, whatever they're using these days. But even as he said it, the close-up of the signature loomed behind him, every shaky curve magnified larger than life. Jasmine's voice was calm, surgical. "This isn't a screenshot from the internet, Mr. Trump. This is a certified copy from federal archives. It's been authenticated. Twice." She let that last word hang. The control room didn't cut away from his face. They caught the way his eyes flicked, quick, involuntary, toward his lawyer in the front row. They caught the faint tightening of his lips, the shallow breath he took before forcing his shoulders back. "Fake new," he repeated, but softer now, almost under his breath. Jasmine stepped forward half a pace, her hands resting lightly on the podium. "The thing about paper trails," she said, is they don't care about politics. They don't care about polls. And they certainly don't care how loud you yell. Somewhere in the balcony, a slow clap began. A single pair of hands. But stopped almost immediately, as if the person thought better of it. The tension was dense enough to taste. The student in the hoodie sat forward, eyes bouncing between the giant signature and Trump himself, measuring them both. In the press section, the old reporter finally started writing again, his pen scratching in long, unbroken strokes. Trump's fingers drummed once on the edge of his podium. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound was barely audible, but in the silence it felt amplified. The LED wall kept the contract up. No one looked away from it. It was more than paper. It was a timestamp. It was a link. And for the first time, the line between photograph and proof had been crossed. Jasmine didn't push further. Not yet. She knew the image of that shaky signature would be burned into the minds of everyone in the room, and when the night was over, it would be burned into the memory of the country. George Stephanopoulos let the hum of the crowd die down before he spoke. His voice, when it came, was deceptively calm, the kind of calm that hides a blade. "Mr. Trump," he said, each word deliberate, "is this your signature?" It was the question, the one that cut away all the noise, all the talking points, all the safe exits. The microphones picked up nothing at first. Not because Trump wasn't there, but because he wasn't answering. The room froze. Every head turned toward him, as though the collective gaze might pull the truth from his lips. The camera crews knew what they had. One lens stayed tight on his face, framing the set jaw, the eyes that didn't quite meet the contract blown up behind him. Another found his hands, fingers gripping the edge of the podium until the knuckles blanched. And then a third caught it, a bead of sweat forming at his temple, rolling down in slow motion, catching the stage light before it fell. The control room hit the slow-mo replay for the broadcast feed. At home, millions would see it over and over, the drop sliding down, then hitting the dark wood of the podium with a faint, almost imperceptible tap. The audience didn't speak. They didn't cough. They didn't shift in their seats. It was as if the entire room had synced its breathing, everyone inhaling together, holding the air in their lungs, waiting for a sound that never came. Stephanopoulos didn't fill the silence. He let it live, let it stretch. The weight of it pressed against the walls, pressed against Trump's shoulders. Trump's mouth opened, then closed again. His eyes flicked toward the front row, where his lawyer sat stone-faced, not moving a muscle. The hesitation lasted only seconds, but in the glare of the lights, seconds feel like lifetimes. Somewhere near the back, a camera clicked. The sound seemed louder than it was, snapping everyone's attention back to the man who still hadn't answered. In the press section, the old reporter stopped writing mid-sentence, his pen hovering above the page. Beside him, a younger journalist mouthed silently to herself, "Say something." But he didn't. Instead, Trump shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the podium creaking faintly under his grip. A muscle twitched at the corner of his jaw. His tongue flicked across dry lips. On the big screen, his signature loomed like a witness that couldn't be intimidated. The shaky pen strokes seemed to vibrate under the heat of the moment. Finally, he spoke, but the voice was lower now, rougher, like it had to be dragged out. "It's ridiculous," he said. "Anyone could fake that." It wasn't a denial, not a clear one, not the kind that slams a door shut. The crowd knew it. The pause before his words had been too long. The pitch of his voice had been just off enough, and in politics, hesitation is its own confession. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just let the silence return, letting the weight of his almost answer settle like dust on every surface in the room. From the front row, the Marine leaned toward the woman beside him and whispered, "That's not a no." The woman nodded, her eyes never leaving the stage. The student in the hoodie pulled out her phone, typing furiously. On social media, hashtags were already erupting. Nushi or signature pause, not a denial, and in white party contract. Trump adjusted his tie, but his hands lingered at his collar a beat too long. He glanced toward the moderator again, as if silently asking for a lifeline, a change of topic, an escape hatch. Stephanopoulos didn't give it to him. Just to be clear, he said, voice even sharper now, you are not denying that is your signature? Trump's jaw worked, but no sound came for a full breath. Then another. The sweat was back, glistening under the lights. The camera zoomed tighter, catching the faint rise and fall of his chest, the way his pupils shifted side to side, as if searching for the right door to run through. When he finally answered, it was with the same deflection as before. I meet a lot of people. I sign a lot of things. This is political theater, nothing more. But it was too late. The damage had been done. Every viewer in the room, every person watching at home, had seen the gap. The beat too long, the silence too heavy, the sweat too telling. They'd seen a man who could answer in one word. No, and hadn't. And sometimes the most dangerous thing you can say is nothing at all. Jasmine waited. Not long, just long enough for the silence to coat the room like frost. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of something older than politics, something that felt carved into the bedrock of the country itself. Power without accountability, she said, her gaze sweeping over the audience and the camera lens with equal force, is dangerous to every citizen. The words fell hard, not shouted, not rushed, but each syllable struck with the finality of a gavel against wood. In the back row, a woman in her 70s clutched her handbag against her chest. Her eyes shimmered as tears welled, one slipping free and tracing down her cheek. She nodded, once, twice, 3 times, as though the truth of the sentence had been waiting inside her for years, needing only someone to speak it aloud. Her neighbor, a younger man in a worn ball cap, glanced at her and then back to the stage, something shifting in his own expression. Jasmine didn't look at Trump. Not anymore. This wasn't about him now. Not solely. This isn't a message for one party, she continued, her voice deepening with conviction, or for one man. This is a message for the whole of America. If we allow those who hold power to escape the weight of responsibility, then the law is no longer a shield for the people. It becomes a weapon for the powerful. A murmur swept through the hall, not of dissent, but of absorption. The sound of people taking in words they weren't ready to dismiss. The LED wall still glowed with the contract, the shaky signature magnified behind her, like the ghost of a truth that refused to leave. In the front row, the Marine sat taller, his hands resting on his knees, his jaw set in a way that said he'd heard this kind of truth before, in different uniforms, under different flags. The student in the hoodie pulled her phone back out, but this time she wasn't typing for her followers. She was recording, framing Jasmine's face and the contract in the same shot. Trump stood silent. The cameras caught him shifting his weight, eyes narrowing slightly, as if calculating whether to respond or let the moment pass. Jasmine pressed forward, her tone now carrying an unmistakable edge. Accountability isn't a partisan issue. It isn't a talking point. It is the only thing that keeps power from becoming tyranny. And tonight, you've all seen, in black and white, what happens when that chain breaks. Her hand gestured subtly toward the contract. The stage lights hit the page just right, the signature gleaming under the heat. From somewhere in the balcony, a single pair of hands began to clap. It was hesitant at first, but it didn't stop. A moment later, another joined in, and then another. The sound wasn't a roar, not yet, but it was steady, growing, threading itself through the room like a rising tide. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't soak in the applause. She let it be what it was, an answer from the people, not a victory lap for herself. Her eyes swept the hall one last time. When she spoke again, it was quieter, almost intimate, as if she were speaking not to hundreds, but to each individual listener. You deserve leaders who are not afraid to answer when the truth comes calling. And you deserve to know that no one, no matter how high they stand, is above the law. The elderly woman in the back row closed her eyes for a moment, her hand still clutching her bag, her lips moving silently with the words above the law. The applause thickened, layering with murmurs, nods, and the subtle shift of people leaning forward, as if drawn closer to something they couldn't quite touch, but could feel in their bones. Trump's mic remained on, but he didn't lift it. The weight of answering in this moment would be heavier than anything he'd carried so far tonight. Stephanopoulos glanced between them, sensing the debate had crossed from the territory of political theater into something rawer, more dangerous, the kind of ground where the wrong word could live forever. And as the camera's red light glowed, broadcasting every flicker of this moment to the nation, the hall seemed to hold its breath again, not for Trump's response, but for the realization that, in this instant, the question wasn't about him anymore. It was about all of them. The applause was still echoing faintly down the hallway when Jasmine stepped through the side curtain. The harsh glare of the stage lights faded behind her, replaced by the dim, humming quiet of the backstage corridor. A young stagehand held the door open for her, his eyes wide as though he'd just witnessed something he knew he'd remember years from now. She nodded once in thanks, then kept walking, heels clicking against the polished floor, the sound measured, deliberate. The dressing room was small, lit by a row of round bulbs around the mirror. The reflection staring back at her was the same one that had walked onto the stage an hour ago. But there was something different in the eyes now. Something settled, something resolved. She reached up, flicked the switch, and the mirror lights went dark. In the quiet, her voice was barely more than a whisper, but it carried a weight that seemed to linger in the air even after the words were spoken. Let them watch. The phone on the counter buzzed, once, twice, then again, in rapid bursts, until the screen was a blur of light and motion. She picked it up, a message from a retired Marine. Ma'am, I've been waiting 20 years to hear someone say that on a stage like tonight. Another from a high school history teacher. My students will watch this tomorrow. They need to know what it looks like when the truth doesn't flinch. And another from a nurse in Detroit. You gave us all a voice tonight. I felt seen. Each one landed differently. Pride, gratitude, responsibility, until the screen dimmed again in her palm. Outside the closed door, the hallway stirred with life. Crew members laughing softly, reporters speaking in low tones, the sound of heavy cables being coiled and stowed. The world was already moving on to the next moment, the next headline. But Jasmine sat still, one hand resting on the phone, the other pressed lightly to the edge of the vanity. Her breathing was steady now. She'd said what needed to be said. Somewhere in living rooms across the country, people were replaying it, pausing at the photo, rewinding to the contract, watching the pause, that long, loaded pause, after Stephanopoulos asked the question. And somewhere else, maybe in places she'd never know, someone was thinking about their own moment, the time when the truth would stand in front of them, silent but undeniable, waiting for them to choose. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes tracing the darkened mirror, as if searching for the reflection of every person who'd sent her those words. Every citizen who'd ever wondered if they'd have the courage when it counted. Her phone buzzed once more. This one was short, from an unknown number. Thank you. No name, no context. Just two words, and somehow they felt like the most important of the night. She stood, gathering her things without hurry, the sound of her chair sliding back breaking the quiet. One last glance in the mirror, not at herself, but at the empty bulbs, like a stage gone dark. Then she stepped out into the hallway, the phone still in her hand. The camera that had followed her from the stage caught her just as she reached the exit, the cool night air spilling in from outside. The street beyond glowed with neon and headlights, the hum of the city swallowing the last of the debate's noise. She turned once toward the lens, her voice steady, eyes holding it like she was speaking directly to every viewer still watching. When it's your turn, she asked, will you stay silent or will you stand up? The question hung there, unanswered, as the door closed behind her. In the end, truth is not a weapon reserved for the loudest voices, nor a shield carried only by the powerful. It belongs to each of us, fragile in our hands, yet unbreakable when we dare to lift it. Silence may keep us safe for a night, but it is courage that shapes the mornings to come. And in every age, in every place, the measure of a society is not what it tolerates from the mighty, but what it demands from itself. If this story made you stop and think, don't just swipe away. Let it settle. Let it challenge you. Share it with someone who still believes accountability belongs to everyone, not just the powerful. Like, comment, and pass it to the ones who know silence can be its own kind of betrayal. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where truth gets its turn on the stage. Hit the bell, because the next story won't be comfortable. It'll be sharp, unflinching, and it might just change the way you see power. This is a fictional dramatization, built from the shadows of real abuses and the light of real courage. Any resemblance to actual people or events is coincidental or intentional for the sake of public reflection. Thanks for watching. Truth isn't granted, it's fought for. This is Harrison Stories.